Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm Brad in the Office of International Education. I also have the honor of advising the Chinese Student Association here at Bellevue College. And this is Aaron Jen. He is the president of the Chinese Student Association.
Okay, hello, this is Aaron. I'm the president of the Chinese Student Association for this year.
So we were fortunate enough to have Bellevue Police Department help organize this presentation on scams with several other partners that you'll hear from. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Officer Hoffman, and he can take us into the presentation. Thank you for coming today. Very much appreciated.
Thank you, Brad and Aaron. Thanks for hosting us and having us here and giving us an opportunity to speak to you all and just spread the word so that we can keep you all from being victims or give you information you can pass along to your family and friends and students and fellow classmates here at class so you can keep yourself safe. I am Major Hoffman. I am one of 3 division commanders with the Bellevue Police Department, and so I'm going to be emceeing this little shindig here. As we get going, I think you probably already figured out, but there's pizza in the back. Feel free to get up and get yourself something to eat and something to drink. And just get comfortable, move around the room. We just ask that you kind of keep it down as you're moving around. So, we're here to talk about fraud and specifically virtual kidnapping. And we're lucky enough to have some representatives from the FBI to come here and give us a class and a little bit of information on what virtual kidnapping is, how to keep yourself safe, how not to be a victim, and that type of thing. Virtual kidnapping is growing. It's becoming a huge problem across the United States. It kind of kicked off kind of in the mid-2000s, around 2010-ish. Started down in the Southwest with Mexican prison gangs. They would make phone calls to parents and just con people into believing that their kids had been kidnapped and get them to wire them money to Mexico. And from there, it's kind of grown across the country. It's changed into different forms. The basic style of it's all the same. But essentially what we've evolved to here in the Northwest is what's occurred last August here on our campus here, which was a student was a victim of one of these virtual kidnapping schemes. And so that's kind of the impetus of this, and that's why it's kicked off. And so that's why we're here, and we're hopefully going to give you some good information that you can use. So we're going to open up with, you've met Brad, and I'm going to introduce some folks that are here. So let me go over what we're going to do for the day here first. So we're going to do some welcome. We're going to do some introductions. SSA Grant Mann from the FBI is going to get up and talk to us. And then we're lucky enough to have someone who has experienced virtual kidnapping, who's been on the wrong end of a virtual kidnapping. She's going to come in and just give us a quick, really a few minutes of her time to kind of explain what happened to her and give kind of a first-hand account of what it's like to be a victim of this crime. That's going to be great. So, and she really she's coming from class, and then she has to get right back to class. So she's going to breeze in some point during the middle of this presentation. So we may just kind of stop what's going on and let her do her thing and get her out of here so she can get back to class. So please be patient with that, if you would. Once we hear from her and SSA Grant Mann is done with his presentation, then we're going to talk and have a question and answer session and let the folks up here talk and answer your questions. Who's sitting up here? That's probably what you're wondering, right? So, well, we have Chief Stephen Milet. He's Chief of Bellevue Police. He's my boss. Thank you for being here, Chief. And I'm going to give him a minute here in a few minutes. I'm going to give him some time to introduce himself. We also have Detective Zong Zhu. He is one of our detectives here at Bellevue Police Department, and he's not going to be speaking, so I'll give him a chance to introduce himself.
Hi, 大家好，我是朱景光。Hi everybody, I'm Detective Zhu with Bellevue Police Department with the Special Assault Unit. Glad to be here today. Later on, I know that I'll be answering some questions if you have any on your mind. Thank you.
Thank you. We're also very lucky to have Supervisory Special Agent Grant Mann with the FBI to do the bulk of our, or the core of our presentation here. We're really privileged to have him here because he's really the expert on what we're going to be talking about today. So, and I'm not going to give him a chance to speak yet because he's going to be talking to you in a few minutes. And finally, we have a representative from Redmond Police Department. This is Detective Sergeant Anne-Marie Fine. And she is here because our case back in August involved the Redmond Police as well, because there was a connection with Redmond. So she's here. She's not going to be speaking. I'll give her a chance to introduce herself and tell her a little bit about what she does.
Thank you. I am Sergeant Anne-Marie Fine with the Redmond Police Department. I currently supervise the detectives for Redmond Police, and I'm just happy to be here today and talk about a case that all of our agencies worked so well on and came to a quick resolution. We were really happy about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergeant Fine. And I just want to introduce a few other people in the room. We have Assistant Chief Carl Kleineck with the Bellevue Police Department. He's our Operations Division Chief. Section Chief. And we have Assistant Chief Pat Arpin. He's our Administrative Services Section Chief. Anybody else from Bellevue College besides Brad? Is Dennis still here? I'm here. Okay. Dennis with Bellevue College is here, and I want to make sure we recognize him. Thank you. And with that, I think I will turn it over to Chief Milet to say a few remarks.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everybody. Good rainy afternoon. And so I parked all the way down by K building on the other end. I had hip replacement surgery a few months ago. So I'm hobbling around, and every time I see a student, hey, can you tell me where N building? Oh, yeah, it's just right there. And it's pouring. So if my hair gets spiky, that's the reason why. If I was smart, I'd do it like him, to where he just cuts it all off, and he can just get a towel and clean up and everything else. Worry-free, that's right. Folks, we're here to talk to you about a very serious issue. But before I get into just my very brief comments, has anybody ever watched Animal Kingdom, the National Geographic, well, you know, all the things about the predators and the prey? You got the predators that work together, that calculate, they pick out a vulnerable individual, group, animal, or whatever, they coordinate their attack, and then they move in. There is no difference with our criminals in this country. Our criminals look for the most vulnerable. They look for individuals that they can victimize, the prey. And unfortunately, I'm here to tell you that in the Chinese community specifically, there's a group of criminals, especially with our international students, that they go after. And by the way, we are recording this today, and my hope is that this message also reaches parents back in China and elsewhere, that the information that the FBI is going to share with you is extremely important on how to avoid becoming the prey. Number one, you got to acknowledge the predator is out there. And then you got to use your keen senses. And you'll see them, right? You see the deer eating whatever, gazelle, and they're looking up and everything else. And if they see anything that's out of the ordinary, off they go. Because they're paying attention. We need to pay attention as well. There are groups that target the elderly. There are groups that target children. This particular group we're going to talk about today, with virtual kidnapping, they target Chinese community international students. I think the most important thing that I would want to communicate to you is, if you think something is out of the ordinary, it probably is, call us. If you have questions, call us. And when that student, your fellow student, comes in here to share her experience, show her the love. She doesn't have to do this. She was terrorized. I watched the video. She's coming in here so you don't have to experience the same thing that she did. So when she does, show her the love. And with that, 2 minutes, right? I mean, usually I go about 15, 20 minutes, but I'm cutting it short, right? You proud of me? All right, there you go. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Chief. You all have no idea. That was amazingly brief. Thank you, Chief. Chief has a lot to say, and it's very good, and it's quality, and we love to hear it. With that, I would like to introduce Supervisor Special Agent Grant Mann with the FBI.
All right, good afternoon. I'm very pleased to be here with you, and thank you so much for taking time to come in and have a brief chat with us about a really important topic. So let me just introduce myself. My name is Grant Mann. I am a supervisory special agent with the FBI. Here I work in Seattle, and we work downtown, and my group specializes in a couple of things, but one of the things we specialize is what's known as violent crime. And so a lot of you, when you think about the FBI, and rightfully so, you probably think about terrorism, you might think about counterintelligence, spies, things like that. These are areas the FBI does specialize in. But domestically, here in the country, throughout the entire country, we also focus on violent crime, on crimes that the police are focused on as well. And so my group is lucky because we specifically get to work hand in hand with our partners here in the Seattle area on almost all of the same violations that they work. So we work together. And this is no exception. These kinds of cases are the kinds of cases that we focus on. My experience, just to give you a little history with where I come from, I started off in San Diego. I worked a lot of violent gang crime for the beginning of my career. And then I slowly moved into different positions that put me out into the international world. And so one of the unique things you may not know about the FBI is that we also have FBI agents that are put in U.S. embassies all over the world as liaison officers to work with local law enforcement. So pretty much any country you can think of, there's an FBI agent who has special responsibility to work with that country and with that local law enforcement. Okay? I spent 3 years in the Dominican Republic just prior to coming here to Seattle. And one of my responsibilities in the Dominican Republic was for the country of Jamaica. Have anybody here been to the country of Jamaica? No? What is Jamaica known for? Music, right? A number of things, right? Good music. What else? Probably some good resorts, beaches, vacation. A lot of people go vacation there, right? What you might not know, though, is that Jamaica is also known for having one of the most prolific scam groups in the northern part of Jamaica. There are approximately 30,000 individuals in Jamaica that are involved in large-scale scams throughout the whole world, where they engage in behaviors that are most commonly referred to as Lotto Scams. And without getting too far down that rabbit hole, Lotto Scams are a form of scam where you send out mailers to thousands and thousands of people that are just like the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes, and you would enter essentially the chance to win money, and then they contact you later and explain to you that you have won money, and then through a process of scam and manipulation, get people to send thousands and thousands of dollars over a long period of time. So I spent a lot of time working on this type of crime, on what is sophisticated, really organized scams. And what we're going to talk about today is a form of a sophisticated, organized scam that is being run. Now, as was just discussed, this isn't something that's brand new. These kinds of scams have been going on for a long time. They happened initially in Mexico, and so for many years we've been looking at these kinds of scams. And the reason why they're so scary is because for the families that are involved in these scams, for the families, it is very real that for a very significant period of time, they truly believe that their loved ones have been kidnapped. And so this is a particularly awful kind of scam because for these families, it has a lot of impact. And even after the family may find out that their loved one wasn't kidnapped, that has a psychological impact for a long time, right? And so this is the reason why we're paying attention to this here. Historically, we've seen a lot of this in Mexico and other countries. Over the last couple of years, we've started to see more involvement from Asian organized crime in places like China or Korea, where they're targeting individuals who are far away from home, typically at universities or working overseas, who do not have a strong connection to their family because of the distance, right? And because sometimes when you come to a new country, either because maybe there's a language barrier to some extent, or because you're sort of new to the area, you may not have a lot of strong ties in the community. So this is why these criminal organizations are targeting folks the way that they do. So I want to just talk a little bit about the crime and the scam itself and how it sort of develops. So oftentimes, the way that these begin is an individual will receive a phone call from some sort of a fake number, and in that phone call, they will be told that there is some problem. And there's a lot of different ways that this might be approached, but they might be told, for example, that there is a legal issue that they're involved in. For example, they may be told that they have that they were illegally involved in ordering false credit cards and that they're involved in credit card fraud. So when you get that phone call, as a good law-abiding citizen, you think to yourself, well, I didn't do that. I need to follow up and find out what happened here so that my name can be cleared. And these folks will then give you a phone number to contact. And in many cases, they will say, oh, you need to call this number because we have folks that can speak in your language, right? And so they'll transfer you. So they'll initially say, we're an American company. You've been flagged as someone who is fraudulently obtaining credit cards. And then they'll pass you off to someone who speaks in your native language. Now, this isn't only for, let's say, Chinese-speaking students or folks here. It can be from any country, really. This scam or this crime can work from any place. But recently, this is where we've seen some specific examples. And so how many of you have received a phone call in the last year that was fraudulent, trying to convince you that you needed to do something in order to give that your information? How many have received a call like that? How many have received more than one of those calls, right? So almost everyone in here is receiving those calls, and it's for a variety of different scams. The most recent one in the United States that I think a lot of you have probably seen is something about your Social Security card, right? Something's wrong with your Social Security card. You need to give us your information so we can fix this problem. Now, the majority of us, we're so used to these calls, we don't even think twice about it anymore. We hang up and move on. But you have to think, some of the crime we're talking about today is a little different because it's out of the ordinary. It's something that could possibly be something that's happening. And when you're in a foreign country and you don't understand necessarily what's happening here, you do want to make sure that nothing's going wrong. And so that's why sometimes folks will get caught up in a scam like this. So right out of the gate, you would then reach out, and what they would do is then they would ask you to use a different mode of communication. So instead of using the phone now, they want you to switch to Skype or WhatsApp or some other messaging app that's encrypted, that can't be traced, right? That's much easier to hide those communications. So let's start right there. If you receive a call, or anyone you know receives a call, and then is asked to transfer over to a messaging app or any kind of online application in order to communicate, that should be a red flag, right? The first thing you should think to yourself is, I shouldn't be transferred immediately over to a WhatsApp messaging app or over to Skype. So that's something you should stop and think, wait a minute, maybe this isn't something real, right? And then the same thing they'll also use fraudulent documents, right? So over the messaging app, they will then send you information to claim that they are who they are. Now, in recent cases, what we've seen is that once you're transferred to this phone number, someone begins to communicate with you that represents themselves to be actual law enforcement in the country from which you came. So, in this case, for example, they would say, oh, I am Officer so-and-so. I'm Officer, what was the name of one of the officers that we got? Officer Chan. I'm Officer Chan. And I work in China, and this is the case that we have against you. And there's a warrant out for your arrest. And there are problems, and you are in big trouble. You are at risk of losing your visa, you are at risk of losing your passport. They may even say your family is at risk of being exposed to this crime. You may have serious legal problems here in our country. Therefore, you need to listen to me because I have all of this information, right? So they use fear as a tactic. The other thing that they will begin to say right at that moment is, you cannot tell anyone about this, and we're going to try and help you to get out from under this problem, right? So they immediately tell you you have issues. Yes, please.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yep.
Sorry to interrupt you, but our other speaker is here, and she can only stay for a few minutes. So we'll bring her up now. This is a young lady who is experienced one of these calls herself, and she just wants to come up and share her experience with you. So maybe it'll hit home with you, and you'll grab something from what she has to say to make it more personal. So come on up. And we want to thank this young lady because it's a very brave thing that she's doing. It's very difficult to get up and do public speaking anyway. And then she's getting up and talking about something that was very scary for her and very personal to her. So we really want to thank you for being here and sharing your story.
Hi, everyone. Today I'm here to speak to you about the scam that happened to me this summer. My goal is to warn you about scams. It was very traumatic experience, so I won't go into a lot of details. But I hope you will be able to learn from my experience. I received several phone calls from different areas other than Seattle, and I never answered them. But one day I had several calls, one after another, and I got scared and finally answered it, which is a huge mistake. After that call, the scam began. They sent me a lot of documents including my individual information through Skype that made me believe what they said was true. Then they threatened me, my family, and my host family. So I sent them a lot of money to protect me and all the others. I was very lucky that they did not get more money from me because the police and the FBI got involved. So my lesson for all of you is to never answer a phone call that you do not know, and let it go to voicemail and determine if it's a scam or not. If it's a scam, block the call immediately. In addition, never give out any personal information over the phone or other social media for yourself and any friends. Do not trust people who you do not know, even if they seem like someone you can trust. And I hope my sharing of this experience will warn you of scams and help you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Once again, we want to just thank you for the bravery and the dedication that you've shown, for taking time out of your schedule and to come in here and speak to us for a few minutes. And now I understand you have to get back to class, correct? So thank you once again. All right, once again, Special Agent, Supervisory Special Agent Grantman.
Thanks. That was fantastic. Just to go back and reiterate what I had said earlier, and these cases have a strong effect on the families, on the individuals that have to deal with that, because over time, you can be led to question a lot about what you know or don't know about law enforcement and how you trust them, right? Because one of the tactics they use is to present themselves as the police. And you're led to believe that you can trust the police, right? And so that's one of the really hard things about these particular cases. All right, so as she just mentioned, there can be threats involved, that if you don't send money, then your family could be at risk, you could be at risk, your status in this country could be at risk. And they use those threats effectively to scare people into sending information and to sending documents and to sending money. So in this particular case, oftentimes, the person who's being spoken to will be encouraged to send money, and the promise is, if you send money, we will be able to wipe away the warrant for your arrest. We'll be able to help you to get out from underneath this crime that you've committed or that people think you've committed, right? Another thing to keep in mind is that the tricky thing about this scam is that's not the goal here isn't that money, even though that money that they're taking is important to them. That's not the final goal. That's just part of the scam. That's part of this scheme. So once you send money, the police now tell you, good job, you did what you needed to do, there's no longer a warrant, but because this took so long to do, you're still at risk of being arrested. So they convince you that you still have exposure, even after you've paid money and even after supposedly the warrant no longer exists. There are other issues you have to face. And so they will keep talking to you over a period of weeks, trying to explain to you what you need to do and how you need to do it. It's the subtle manipulation that they do over time. And what they do is they change. Instead of being accusatory, now they act as if they're your friend, right? They start to say, well, I'm here to help you. I can sense that you're a nice person. I think you're a nice person. And I can tell it's not fair what's happening to you. So I care about you. I want to help you. And so now they are trying to put themselves in a position as if they're your ally, someone that you can trust, someone that is going to help you, right? And over time, with a combination of threats and then also using manipulation to make you be their friend, and because you're afraid, right, you want to latch on to something good over time, all the while they're telling you, don't tell anybody about this conversation. Don't tell anybody about me. If you do, then you will risk being arrested and thrown in jail. So please don't tell anyone about this. Now, I want to say that aside from what our friend mentioned about not answering phone calls that you don't recognize, which is a really good place to start, but if by chance you do answer a phone call and at any point someone says to you, don't tell anyone about this conversation, that's the first sign that you should definitely tell someone about this conversation, okay? Now, I know that from different places in the world, there is a lack of trust in law enforcement, maybe, just because maybe in those countries there's not as much trust that you can go to someone and know that they'll tell you the thing straight. I know that. And all I can tell you is this, that here in Seattle, okay, the law enforcement partnerships here really do care and really will help you. Let me give you the reason why I think that, and this is a really good example. When we got the information, when we found out that there was a possible kidnapping of a student of Bellevue College, 3 different groups immediately showed up. We had two police departments and the FBI all converged, and at the end of the evening, once we got going, how many police officers and individuals do you think we had working just this one case? Just generally. Yeah, I would say within an hour, we had 30 law enforcement officers, full-time, and this is in the evening, after hours, 30 law enforcement officers work in this case. Every aspect of this case, okay? We went and interviewed neighbors all around the entire neighborhood where our friend lived, right? Every neighborhood that we could find to see if they had heard or seen anything. We started doing all kinds of other technical work with phones and information and emails to try and find out what had happened to this student. We had 3 different jurisdictions. We put up a command post immediately. So I want you to know that when you reach out to us with a serious concern about the safety of one of your friends or yourself or something you're going through, we will respond. We take it seriously. It matters to us, okay? And luckily, in this case, within about 10 hours, I think it was less than 10 hours, from the start to the finish, we were able to go and find our student and let her know that this was a scam that was going on. And because of that, we were able to help her family avoid paying additional money, okay? Now, we don't want anybody to get that far down the road on these types of cases, but what we want you to know is when you have questions or concerns, we are here, we will respond. We take it seriously, okay? Yes?
Can you give us an example of how much money they're asking for?
I think in this case, there was maybe 200,000 yen at first, and then I think the numbers go up. But this is just a ballpark figure. It can be different depending on the case. Yeah.
Who reached out to you, the family or the victim here?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my understanding is that the family, through the school, reached out then to the police here in Bellevue, and then that made its way out as well to other law enforcement agencies who track. Because we have partnerships, so Bellevue has law enforcement officers that work with the FBI in Seattle, and so a lot of times we communicate pretty quickly once we hear about these types of cases, right? So our role at that point, once we heard that Bellevue had a case, potentially, we immediately came out, responded, and said, hey, we're here to help, whatever you need, and ultimately ended up working the case jointly, right? So that's kind of how that went. So I think at this point in the scam, where we're at is the student or the individual has provided money to these individuals to get their record clean. Over a period of time, there's more conversation, more manipulation, and then eventually, what is said is this: I am your friend. I am a law enforcement officer. I have just found out that there are a group of officers in Seattle right now that are looking for you. They want to arrest you based on everything we've talked about for the last 2 weeks. And I like you. I'm your friend. I want to help you. So I don't want you to get arrested. So here's what you have to do. You need to take your phone, take all of the chips and things out of it, wipe all the messaging apps clean, right? And get a whole new message app. That's the only message app that you'll use is the one you have now to communicate with me. And what I want you to do is, I want you to tell all your friends and all your family that you're going to be gone. Tell your family you're going to be at your friend's house for a couple of days. Tell your work you're sick and you're not going to be in for a couple of days. Tell everybody you're going to be gone. And you need to go find a hotel for 2 or 3 nights. And you're going to go into that hotel under a fake name with just the phone I told you, with just the app I have. And we're going to communicate, and I'll let you know when it's safe to come out. So I'm helping you to avoid being arrested, okay? So you can see where this is headed, right? Now they're isolated. They have no one else to talk to. They've gotten rid of all their devices. And they're sitting in a hotel room by themselves, waiting quietly. Meanwhile, and this is where it gets really interesting and kind of complicated because these guys are really smart. They've already done their homework. They've already sent all the fraudulent documents showing that they are actual police, right? They've proved who they are. And what they'll do now is they'll say, hey, listen, while you're sitting in that hotel room doing nothing, you could really help us because we're police. And here in China, we're working a case where we're working an actual kidnapping. Now, we need your help. You're there. We could really use your assistance. If you would help us by making a couple of videos of yourself on your phone and pretend to be kidnapped. And they have a long story to explain why this makes sense. But by this time, right, individuals are very believing. They're very bought into the whole process. And it doesn't seem weird to them, right? So they say, you could help us by making these videos. And so the individual sitting in the hotel room will set the camera up, sit on the bed, and then pretend during a series of videos to be kidnapped and try and be convincing that they're actually somewhere being held against their will and begging their parents to rescue them. Okay? What do you think these guys do with those videos? Yeah, they're sending those videos straight to their folks, and their parents are seeing the videos now and showing and being asked to send money. And what do the parents do? They reach out to the family. They reach out to the school. They reach out to anybody they can think of. And what are all those people saying? I haven't seen her in 2 days. I have no idea where she went. She disappeared. And no one can find her, right? So you see how this is pretty ingenious because now the family believes she's taken. They're seeing videos of their own child begging for help, and nobody has seen their child, and it's in a foreign country, right? So this is how it works, and this is how these guys end up making a lot of money because they convince families to send that money while their loved one is holed up in a hotel room, okay? So that's just the gist of the general scheme of how this works. There are nuances. It changes depending on the case. It can change depending on the criminal group. But that is, generally speaking, what they're interested in doing. So a couple of take-homes, right, that I want to put out there. For those of you who are here, I mean, there's not very many of us here today, but please, please, please communicate with your friends and your family members, especially those who are here in this country as guests who may not have been here very long. Please reach out to them and let them know that you are there for them should they ever have any questions about anything. We need people in our lives that we can trust to talk things over with. If you don't have somebody to talk to, then that's a huge problem because it's so much easier for you to be isolated by folks, right? And so the key here is please, please talk to your friends and family. Let them know that this kind of scam is out there, and if they ever get any kind of an odd phone call, to reach out and ask questions. The first thing is just to verify, right? The second thing is stay in contact with your families. For those of you who are here and have families in a foreign country, reach out to them regularly. Make sure they're aware of who and what you're doing, where you're, who you're involved with, what you're doing. And if you ever have a concern, call them. Even if someone tells you, or especially when someone tells you not to talk to them, call them immediately. Because most of the time you'll be able to figure out pretty quickly that this is a scam. This is something that's happening that you shouldn't be getting involved with. Okay? I'll end it there. I know there'll be some time for question and answer if there's anything we missed. But these are the kinds of things that we really do care a lot about. We want you to be safe while you're here. We want you to feel confident. And we want you to trust that you can talk to people when these sort of things come up. Okay?
Contact information, Brad.
Yeah, contact information here. You can call us anytime. That's our Seattle field office. That's our public access line. You can go online and you can enter anonymous tips into the FBI tip line. You can do the same for your local police departments. Honestly, it doesn't really matter who you reach out to, but the key is just reach out to somebody, even if that's just here at the school to start, okay? The one other thing I'll mention is that do be cautious, a little bit cautious about what you do with your personal information, especially online. Much of the information that these guys gather is just from Facebook, it's from Instagram, it's from your open accounts. Most of us should be aware by now, it's probably not a great idea to have an open account that anybody can see. Because even if you think you're being careful, it's very easy to figure out where you live, what you're doing, who your friends are, these kinds of things. So I recommend to people, have a closed account. It's great to be on Instagram, it's great to be on Facebook, but be careful about who could be lurking on your account, right? Connect with people you care about and make sure you know who you're accepting as a friend. Sure, but be careful about the kind of information. Another good one is geo-tagging, right? If you geo-tag your photos, what happens? Everybody knows exactly where you are anytime, right? And so, yeah, most of the time it won't matter, but there are occasions where it might, because they might want to know exactly where you are and what you're doing, and they can follow you and get your information in that way, okay? These folks are smart, they're sophisticated. You can think about it. There are at any given moment a full room of people just like this, and all they're doing all day for 10 to 12 hours a day is putting their phone to their ear and calling people to try and connect up on this scam. How many calls could you make in one day for 10 hours, right? You can call thousands and thousands and thousands of people. It only takes a couple a day in the entire country for that to be a lucrative business for you. Because if you can get $10,000, $15,000 from anybody every single month, right, you can start to see why people are doing this, because they can make money. So it is scary. It's very lucrative. The other thing is that we do try our best to follow up with these cases. So, for example, we have liaisons in the FBI who are in China. We can take all of the information, pass it to the law enforcement in China, who could then try and locate these types of groups who are taking advantage of folks, right? So that's another thing that we try to do in the long run. But thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. Feel free to ask questions moving forward, and we'll do our best to answer. And we appreciate you coming out.
Thank you, Agent Man. That was great information. We appreciate you taking the time to come and speak with us and donating your time to the cause to keep you all safe as well. So we heard from our victim, and I know she went really fast and maybe was kind of hard to hear, but kind of the main purpose for her to be up here is to put a face to this kind of crime. So that she didn't want us to use her name, understandably, but she's a peer of yours. She's one of you. She's just a person going through life, trying to get an education, living her life. And this happened to her. And so she could be you and you could be her. And so we want to demonstrate how important it is for you to keep yourself safe and to be aware that there's these kind of bad people out there that might want to take advantage of you. And so that's great information. Thank you, Agent Mann. We want to especially thank the young lady that came and spoke to us, but she's not here. So at this time, we will open it up for questions. We have Chief Milet, we have Detective Zhu, we still have Agent Mann, which is great, and we have Sergeant Detective Fine from Redmond.
About 2 weeks ago, I had a Chinese international student who forwarded an email that he received, and it said in the email that, I know what you've been up to, and if you don't pay $500, I'm going to expose you. So I called our BCIT, and he said, oh, it's a scam, just delete it, have the student delete it. Should we have, I contacted the police, or just deleting it alone is okay, or what should I?
So the question is, should she report, if you guys didn't hear her, she said she had gotten a scam email or phone? Or a forwarded email that was asking something to the effect of saying, we know what you've done, and send us $500 right now.
And if you don't, we're going to expose you.
We're going to expose you. So the question is, should you call the police, or who should you call in that instance?
I called IP at the school.
Okay. And does somebody want to field this one?
I would say that if you're getting phone calls, many of us get these saying our computers are not up to date, we need security software, we're going to give you a rebate, things like that, or just a general, we know what you're up to, send us money. The police department does not need to know about that. We only need to know about it when it gets further along, when you're being asked to go somewhere, asked to not contact people. You can certainly call the information line, even 911, for example, and say non-emergency, just to be put in contact with a police officer that you can talk to and run by a scenario. Hey, do you need to know about this? What should I do about it? We'll certainly answer those calls, but just never act upon them. We do get a lot of cases where people meet on, for instance, dating apps, and then they're immediately taken offline to another application. That is a huge red flag. And then they might start chatting, words might get exchanged, images might get exchanged, and that's when we get a lot of, hey, you need to send us money because we've now copied your entire Facebook contact list and we're going to share everything that you're up to. That is a case where we see quite frequently and do like to know about, but do know that many of these cases are coming from out of the country, and it's extremely difficult for us to look into them. So the best thing is just not to take the bait.
So Sergeant Fine works for Redmond Police Department. I can tell you for Bellevue Police Department, we have an online reporting application. So you can go online, you can just Google City of Bellevue, go to the website, look for the police department, and there'll be a link for an online reporting tool, and you can report that kind of stuff online.
If the person that's communicating with you or your friend starts giving you details, hey, look, I know you go to the soccer field at 3 o'clock in the afternoon after school. I know what you drive. I know where you live. You need to call us, okay, so we can get involved. Because it may be legit. 99% of them are scams, but we also have to be on guard for that one time when it's a legitimate threat. And what you described, it sounded like exactly what Grant was talking about, and such, a scam. But there's always the possibility. So call.
In Bellevue, if you call and ask for an officer, you're going to get an officer. So if you don't know what to do, you can call 911 and ask, and an officer will come out and walk you through the. I think you were first over here.
Hi, so I work in the International Education Office, and my question is kind of related to all of this. everybody else's kind of questions and answers. Where is the level where you can actually prosecute somebody for this? Because all of us I get emails, I get phone calls all the time threatening to ruin my credit, threatening to, anything. Where does it actually become a crime? Because many of these people who are victims are voluntarily doing what people are asking them to do. So where does it become something that you can actually prosecute?
I'm going to go to SSA Man for this one.
Sure. So you bring up a very good point. One of the, and this is true in some ways of a lot of crime, is that if something is so prolific, like these folks are, thousands and thousands and thousands of calls a day, all over the country, all over the world. So the reality is no one law enforcement, no law enforcement is going to be able to attack each person, each call, each one. We do our best. So what I would say is that occasionally we will look at trends, we will look at the aggregate effect of certain cases, and sometimes if we can identify true victims who've lost a lot of money, we'll take a look at those cases and do our best to target the groups that are working it, right? So my experience is from like Jamaica, for example. These folks are making upwards of $1 billion a year off of these scams. We aren't getting every one of these guys, but what we do occasionally is if there's a group that's really hammering and hitting hard in a lot of different areas, we will put out leads, we'll interview 30, 40, 50 victims all over the country, we'll figure out how much money was lost, we'll track all of the calls that were made, and eventually our game is to figure out who in the United States is doing the running and picking up of money, what bank accounts are being used. We'll get all of that information and then also dip down into Jamaica and figure out who the kingpins are, who the call centers are, who are these folks that are operating and what they're doing. And we have had some success in prosecuting those cases. But I will tell you it's not easy. This is one of these really difficult crimes to go after. But yeah, even if someone gives their information voluntarily, if they're being scammed out of it, it's still a crime. And we can still prosecute people for that behavior. So, but we do rely, I think ultimately we're going to rely more and more on public awareness so that folks can be vigilant and not give that information in the first place. We have to stop it before it gets any further. It's tough. This is not an easy crime to fight.
So you were speaking about how the FBI has liaisons across different, countries in their police force. I was wondering because, from my experience, when I came across a couple of those instances where they were trying to ask for different kind of information from me to, find out more information, because I'm not very much online, but they were just trying to pick at it. I was looking online, and they had all these websites to post, like, numbers that call or like emails that are used and things like that. Is that something that is monitored by the FBI and used as like the resources to send on to try and find those resources or those kingpins, or is that just like a consumer-led thing and you guys don't really do anything with that?
So yeah, good question. So there is, because these online, phone, different types of scams are so rampant, we do have a website that the FBI uses to aggregate all that information and then try and do what you just said, sort of like say, okay, look, 100 people called in about this one number. Clearly we have a problem with that number, and now we need to look into seeing if there's a way to like track it or figure out how to shut it down, that kind of thing. The website, I believe, is www.ic3. So the letter I, the letter C, and the number 3.gov, G-O-V. If you go to www.ic3.gov, that's a website that the FBI has set up for anybody in the whole nation can go to that website and enter information about a scam that they're getting, right? So whether, like you said, phone numbers, if you're getting repeat calls over and over about this, Social Security scam, for example, the more people that put in there, we do regularly go through those, and if we have a way to like aggregate that information and then start a case and start targeting those groups, we do. And so, for example, here in Seattle, we would receive a reference from our IC3 group saying, hey, there's something going on in Seattle surrounding these groups of numbers and this type of scam. We need you to look into it. And then we would usually partner up and figure out what we can do. So that's kind of how that works. www.ic3.gov.
Thank you. I'm going to see if we can get a little more efficient here. Okay, I guess we're stuck with one. Ma'am, did you have a question up front here?
Yeah, I was wondering, what was the preferred method of payment? Credit card, cash, money order?
Preferred method of payment. It's money wire? Wiring money?
Wiring money.
Yeah, wiring money. I think they'll have you wire money.
Usually these accounts are offshore, like they're overseas, so they would ask you to wire money overseas to some account. And then normally those accounts then move money quickly, so from one account to the other to the other. So the money's gone pretty fast. They don't stick around much.
So that would require a bank to wire money?
Western Union, any kind of money, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I would just add that we have had a lot of students, or prior when I was at UW, and then here at least once, who were talked into going to Safeway or QFC or where have you to purchase the credit debit card that you can buy at the cashier, because as soon as that money the number is given and the back is scratched and the code is given, it's pretty much just gone. So it's really hard to then get back to it. So that's been sometimes the first step that Officer Mann talked about, was that that first layer when they're first just trying to get him in there.
Can I ask you all a question? When have you ever heard of any group, and I'm sitting here trying to think in my 54 years of life, where somebody calls you and says, look, you won money, but first I need you to go get a money order and pay for what we're going to pay. I mean, again, there's some common sense that goes along here, right? I understand people prey on the vulnerable and everything else, and we see this a lot with our elderly folks. There's go get a money order, go do that, and the police department will never, ever, 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 ever call you and say, we got a warrant out for your arrest, come pay us, or we're going to come and get you. No law enforcement agency in the United States of America will ever do that, and please, as another takeaway, share that with your network. We don't do that. We don't take money at traffic stops. If an officer takes money to make a ticket go away, number one, it's either somebody impersonating a police officer, or that's a bad police officer. We need to know about it, and we're going to get rid of them. And again, in my 31 years as a cop, I have not seen that.
Thank you, Chief. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We're running a little bit over, and so I think we're going to take one more question. I think you had your hand up first. Okay. Well, we can. If the panel can stay, we can stay.
It was just a simple question about how is the Jamaican government, are their resources put towards this? Are they really, because when you're talking about major call centers, 30,000 or so, it probably doesn't take, I don't know. You can probably find some of those major outlets. Are they supporting? I mean, are they partnershiping pretty good?
Does anybody want to field that one?
No, that's a good question. This also speaks more to the larger collaboration we have with foreign countries, right? I'll say it depends, right? Because to some extent, the victims from these crimes tend to be heavily located in places like the United States and Canada. And so there has been a sense in the past from governments outside the United States and Canada that, hey, look, if people are gullible enough to fall for these kinds of scams, that's not our problem, right? Like, and it's unfortunate because they're thinking if rich Americans or rich Canadians want to spend their money in this way, whatever, that's fine. We're not going to worry too much about it. But the problem is that what they don't realize is that the victims of these crimes tend to be the vulnerable, the elderly folks, and they don't always tend to be rich either, right? They often will spend their last dollar in these scams. And then the other thing we're seeing is that, like you saw today, we're not talking about people who are traditionally vulnerable. These are our peers, right? So not only that, but in this case, the folks in China are targeting Chinese citizens, right, who are in this country. So they're not even targeting American citizens. They're targeting Chinese citizens in this country. So back to your original question, though, it's a mix. We do our best, but you also realize that some countries have less resources, right? I mean, Jamaica has such a violent crime problem. They have murder every day that they're trying to like tamp down the hard stuff that's happening in their country. So it's much more difficult for them to target what is looked at as like a fraud, like a victimless, in their minds, almost victimless fraud, because no one's getting hurt. So it's difficult. We do our best, and we have different relationships in different countries. I think in China, for example, there are a lot of places where we just can't cooperate. There's not as much of a will to cooperate across law enforcement. But this is a kind of crime that we would see more cooperation, right? Because first of all, we're helping to investigate individuals that are targeted here that are citizens of China, right? So that in theory, there should be an interest of the Chinese government to protect their own citizens who are overseas. And so we're doing our best to make sure that they have the information they need to try and investigate and find these individuals who are doing this from China. So we do have some level of cooperation, but every country's different, right? But we do our best to give as much information to our partners and to help them focus on these kinds of crimes.
Thank you. I want to steer the conversation kind of back into how do we keep ourselves from being victimized here. So does anybody have a question specific to that type of thing? Does anybody have a question at all? I guess we'll broaden it out then.
I was wondering, in the case of our victim here, or just in general, are these scams coming through more from personal emails or from college emails specifically?
So who has the wisdom to field that one? Detective Zhu.
So for this case, it's actually her personal cell phone number. But again, in any case, it could come from school email or personal email. But in this particular case, from her cell phone number.
Do they just randomly get a cell phone number, or are they picking a certain area, of how to get those numbers?
So I think Agent Mann addressed that in his presentation, where they will farm. I'll give it over to you.
Well, I just say, look, we don't know exactly always how they choose how they choose the folks to target, but for example, in this case, let's say Bellevue, right? Bellevue, we know there's a lot of, or Bellevue College even. We can say, well, there's a fairly large number of foreign students who are here from China studying, who are overseas for a short period of time and then potentially go back home. So all they really need to do is identify those students, that group of students. Now, we don't really know exactly how they're finding out the names and information from who those folks are, but presumably it wouldn't be that hard to do. Social media engineering is one way you can look at people's social media, but look, you could pay off any number of individuals at any level in China, for example, to get records of individuals who have student visas in the United States, right? That's not that hard. If you have a list of 500,000 students who are currently in the United States on student visas from China, there's your list. Now all you got to do is start doing your homework on each one of these individuals and figure out where they are, what they're doing, who they're with. That's pretty much it. So I don't know that we've identified exactly where they're getting the information, but we know they're aggregating information on groups that they've already determined to be their targets.
Thank you. I think we're going to wrap it up here. Get everybody back to class and back to work that needs to get back to work. I will offer the last word to Chief if he wants to make it.
Do you know how lucky you are that you are going to school at Bellevue College? Do you know how lucky you are that you're living in this area? And let me tell you why. It's because of the relationships that we have, law enforcement, with the federal government, with each other. This is a network, a network of protective fencing around you. We will do whatever we possibly can collectively together to protect you, but you got to do your part. You got to be aware. And we're specifically talking about the scams. If it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. If there's something going on that you need to share, call our police department. I don't care where you're from or whatever, call our police department. And we'll tell you, yeah, that sounds like a scam to us. The fact of the matter is that solving these is really, really difficult. I get them on my cell phone. I get them on my city cell phone. And even when I say, this is Chief Milet of the Bellevue Police Department, may I help you? Yeah, I need you to go to Walgreens right now and go get a money order and everything else. Yeah, okay, I'm right on that. Well, meet me over there, you know? So we're all subject to it. Share the information with your family and your friends. We need to be looking out for each other. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you, Chief. And I just want to wrap up by saying thank you for inviting us to campus and allowing us to come here and speak to you. Thank you for being a good audience. Thank you to Brad Huggins and Aaron with the Chinese Student Association for setting this up and getting the pizza and the venue. We appreciate that. Thank you. And with that, we will wrap it up. Thank you for attending. Have a good afternoon.